Hello, today is Wednesday, February 4th. Welcome to episode 553 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI Senior Fellow Morgan Vina, and I'm joined today by our founder and executive director, Jamil Jaffer, advisory board member, Lester Munson, and Senior Fellow, Andy Kaiser. All right, y'all. So today, the Fault Lines crew is staying a little close to home, and we're going to be taking a look at several developments in the Western Hemisphere that underscore the region's growing importance to U.S. national security. We're going to start in Colombia. So formerly a sharp critic of President Trump, Colombian President Gustavo Petro visited the White House yesterday in what can be described as a cordial meeting. The two leaders set aside ideological and personal differences to talk about counternarcotics cooperation and the potential export of Venezuelan natural gas to Colombia. Petro also left with some swag, including an autographed copy of The Art of the Deal and a signed red hat modified to read, "Make America's Great Again." All right. So we're also going to turn to Panama, where the Supreme Court there recently annulled a contract allowing Hong Kong-based CK Hutchison to operate 2 ports at the Panama Canal. Beijing's Hong Kong office was not very pleased about this. They warned Panama that it would pay a heavy price. The decision aligns with the Trump administration's push to curb Chinese influence over the canal, which is, of course, as we know, a critical link between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. Jamil, turning to you first. Colombia and Panama are part of a region that really for a long time was the redheaded stepchild when it came to the prioritization of U.S. foreign policy. Now, under the Trump administration, it's at the top. When you see this rapprochement between President Trump and President Petro and the United States seeing China really getting boxed out of Panama, are these signs of progress?
Yeah, look, I think there's actually opportunities here because, in the past, we've had a challenge relationship with both Panama at times and with Colombia at times. In particular, when we had President Duque in power in Colombia, we had a good working relationship. Prior to that, we even had great work with them on Plan Colombia to eliminate or significantly limit cocaine trafficking in the region. We worked aggressively with their military to try and go after a number of the sort of terrorist/drug trafficker groups in that region. Panama's always been a challenge for us because they long ago in the 90s did a deal with some Chinese companies, Hutchison Whampoa, now CK Hutchison, based out of Hong Kong, to manage those ports on the canal. Back in those days, people were warning about China, and people made fun of them. Dana Rohrabacher, as a congressman, made a point about that, and people were like, it's not a real big deal. Now, obviously, we've woken up to the reality that President Trump is trying to get the Chinese out of the canal. This has been a challenge. The Panama Supreme Court finally doing something that might be in our interest, and so we're in a good place. Now we're building a relationship with President Petro. And remember, the other key thing about that region of the world is it's a key choke point for immigrants coming through. And so the U.S. has tried to stop the flow of immigrants through the Darien Gap. That's that part of Central America where there is no road connecting South America to North America, so immigrants transit by foot. That back in 2024, there were hundreds of thousands of immigrants coming through there, about 250,000 to a little more than that. Now it's down to a few thousand. They've cut that flow by in the 90+%. And so there are opportunities here for us to really regain our sort of control. The Don Roe doctrine is in full effect when it comes to the Americas, but it comes at a cost, right? We're just now getting a carrier into the Persian Gulf. We're sending a second one to the Mediterranean. We had to pull the first carrier out of Southeast Asia, out of the China AOR. We're sending one to replace it, but we're limited on our ability to project power once we've decided we're going to put a carrier in the Caribbean to project power against drug traffickers and Venezuela. So, there are trades being made here. It doesn't come cost-free to reestablish the Monroe or Don Roe doctrine, but it seems to be working.
Mm-hmm. All right, Andy, turning next to you. President Trump has put a lot, or I should note, he put Russia and China on notice that really the Western Hemisphere is part of the U.S. area of influence, so to speak. So the canal is one example. The U.S. ousting of, Maduro in a law enforcement operation, it was another. China and Russia, surely get the message, but do you think they're going to back down from the region?
Yeah, I think the Maduro operation in Venezuela was as much about Venezuela as it was about Russia and China's influence, as it was about Cuba, as it was about even pressuring historic U.S. allies like Colombia and Mexico, others who had trended left in recent years. So I actually love this story. I think this is something us national security professionals have talked about for the 25 years I've been in Washington. I remember distinctly President George W. Bush as Texas governor. A lot of us thought there would be a lot of attention paid to this hemisphere. Of course, 9/11 happened on his watch, and that all, got sidelined. So the last time an aircraft carrier group was in the Caribbean in a meaningful way was in, I believe, 1994 for disaster operations and rescue. So this increased presence that Jamil talked about, I think the world is clearly noticing. It does surely limit our options in other places, as we saw in Iran. It took a little while for that beautiful armada, as the president called it, to make its way to the region. But I think the Russians and the Chinese will get the message in some regards. In others, they are more embedded, and it will be difficult to, rip and replace their influence in areas like telecommunications. I'm thinking about Huawei's, the gains they've had in recent years in the region. So, yes, I think diplomatically, I think the message and the signs it sends to Beijing and Moscow are powerful, but some of the infrastructure, the ports, the telecommunications infrastructure, the trade routes, some of those will take a great deal longer of time to wane the influence of our adversaries in the hemisphere.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Munson, you've traveled a lot to Panama in the last year. You've got to see these relations in the region play out up close and personal. What do you make of all of this?
Thanks, Vina. I think there's a very good thing happening overall, which is the U.S. is paying way more attention to the Western Hemisphere. That's a good thing. We were neglectful for way too long. We let China get a real head start on us in a lot of areas. And this is the actions of the last year are really starting to turn that around. You could quibble with some of the methodology, particularly on kind of the diplomatic and rhetoric side. The whole Greenland episode was, I think history's not going to look back on that terrifically, but overall, really positive steps. And but there's a long way to go here. China remains a huge factor in Latin America. It's done a ton of investment around the hemisphere. It is a major trading partner of a whole bunch of the countries to our south. And we haven't really addressed that directly yet. Yes, we've taken good steps in Venezuela, and by collaborating with Panama on a bunch of issues, we've really made some real progress. But China remains a huge factor. We're neglecting a lot of the tools that we used to use in this kind of area: foreign assistance, development finance, other kinds of uses of soft power or smart power or deal power, which we were denigrating for the last year. We need to bring those back. We need to have a real strategy. We need to push China out of these markets. We're not going to be able to do it completely, but we need to get the edge on them. That means getting American companies to invest. It means being much smarter about our overall economic approach to the region. And dare I say, some sort of free trade arrangement at the end of the day is what we really need. Now, we may not be able to call it that anymore for political reasons. It'll have to be a fair trade deal or something like that. That we need increased trade with our friends and allies in the region. At the end of the day, that's the thing that's really going to push China out.
All right, Jamil, your hand is raised.
Yeah, see, I was trying not to interrupt. So look, I think Les is right in part. I think he's right on the economics. I think he's right about the tools. Where I think he's wrong is this whole Greenland destroyed everything. I actually think the Greenland play, while it was a little over-aggressive, was the right play. I think we should have more authority and more capability in Greenland. And I think the president was right to push hard. And I frankly think it put everybody back on their heels and got them to realize, like, we're not messing around. Now, a lot of people are reading this as another taco. Trump always chickens out. I don't read it that way. I think the Greenland play was a good one. A little over-aggressive, right? But that's Donald Trump. That's who we elected. I think it's a good play. I disagree with Les on that one.
I am happy, Jamil, to have you kind of outflank me to the MAGA side on this one. Good for you.
Nobody ever said that ever.
I celebrate your flexibility, my friend.
All right. Well, with that is a wrap. Thanks as always to Kelly Crowley, Claude Jennings, and the NSI staff for their help in producing today's episode. Join us on Friday, February 6th for another episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you smart, fast on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. We're on YouTube, so check out our channel for a video of today's episode. If you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.